Chapter 2.10, Make Assumptions. Now in this final lesson of Chapter 2, we're going to be looking at word problems where you're going to need to make assumptions, and these assumptions could potentially have a mathematical effect on the outcome or the calculations that you're going to be making. Now in general, what you want to do when you're solving word problems, of course, is to read the question over a number of times, but you also want to take a look at what kind of assumptions need to be made before you start your calculations. These kind of assumptions that you're going to be making might have some kind of mathematical effect in terms of your calculations. So you need to make sure you think about these types of assumptions before you start your calculations. Of course, once you have all your assumptions made, then you can go ahead and use those assumptions to help you solve your problem. And finally, you want to make sure that the answer that you come up with is a reasonable one. So here are a couple question scenarios that I came up with where you're going to need to make some direct mathematical assumptions before you start to make your calculations. Now in terms of direct mathematical assumptions, I'm talking about assumptions where it can directly impact the calculations that you're going to be making, not sort of far-fetched ones or ones that are indirectly involved with the question. So taking a look at the first scenario, it says Ernie can drive at a speed of 50 kilometers to work. He lives 15 kilometers away. How long is it going to take him to get to work? The second question, it says a realtor earns $25,000 for each house she sells. She sold 10 houses last year, so what can she anticipate to earn in the following year? So take a quick pause here and try to write down some direct mathematical assumptions for each of these two scenarios, and then we'll take a look at using those assumptions to make our calculations. Okay, so for the first question, here are a few of the assumptions that I made. Now just keep in mind that these are not the only assumptions that are possible, but these are just some of the ones that I came up with off the top of my head. So in terms of direct mathematical assumptions, based on the question, it says that Ernie's going to be driving at 50 kilometers per hour to work. So one of the mathematical assumptions that you need to make is that the 50 kilometers per hour is the average speed that he's going to be driving over the entire trip to work. This is assuming that he's not going to be going any faster, not any slower, so not at 55 kilometers per hour nor 49 kilometers per hour, for instance. So it's exactly 50, so that's going to be important for our calculations. The second assumption that I made was that he lives exactly 15 kilometers away and not 15.1 kilometers or 15.2 kilometers or something like that. So in terms of our calculation, it's exact value of 15 kilometers away. That's going to be very important. Now I also came up with a list of what I call indirect assumptions that I often see students make in questions like this that really don't have a mathematical impact on the question. So these are ones that I would consider kind of far-fetched or not really related or necessary to assume. So here are a few of them. That he doesn't get fired from his job. Well, okay, yes, I suppose, if he fired from his job, then he wouldn't need to drive to work, but that's kind of avoiding the question, so this is kind of getting a little off topic in that sense. He doesn't take the bus, or he has a license to drive, or that he doesn't run out of gas. Yes, I suppose all of these could potentially impact the question, but these kind of assumptions are getting a little bit off topic or are somewhat far-fetched. So I think you can see the difference between the ones that I call direct mathematical assumptions versus the ones I call indirect type of assumptions here. Alright, now if I skip down to the second question, It says a realtor earns $25,000 for each house she sells. She sold 10 last year, so what's she going to anticipate to earn next year? Well, one of the mathematical assumptions, the direct mathematical assumptions, is that she's going to sell exactly the same amount of houses. That's 10 next year, no more, no less. Otherwise, that obviously is going to change our calculation. Also, that she's going to be making $25,000 for each house she sells, not more or less again, because otherwise, once again, that could potentially change the amount that she makes overall. That she earns the same amount regardless of how many houses she sells. In this case, she's selling 10 anyway, but we're assuming that it's exactly that 10. And also that calculations of tax aren't necessary in this question, so we don't need to bother with any kind of sales taxes or income taxes or any those kind of calculations as well. In terms of indirect type of assumptions, that the housing market doesn't crash, or that she's still on the same job next year and still selling houses, well, yes, those are important, but don't have necessarily that same mathematical impact to this question itself. So hopefully with these two questions you kind of see what kind of assumptions that we're talking about when we're talking about direct mathematical assumptions. So just make sure that these are the kinds that you list when you're asked these kind of questions on a test or a quiz, and in that you don't duplicate the same one in different words, that kind of thing. So finally, I have a sample question here. It says, John works once a week for 8 hours. He gets paid $15 an hour. He'd like to save up for a trip that will cost him $3,500, which he wants to go on 8 months from now. So will he be able to save enough money? So you'll need to make some mathematical assumptions to begin with before you actually make your calculations. So take a quick pause here and jot down as many mathematical assumptions as you can, and then we'll take a look at those and use those to help us with our calculations. Okay, so scrolling through here. Now in this question, these are just some of the assumptions that I made, but of course you could possibly come up with different ones as well, but make sure that they're mathematical assumptions, of course. So here I assumed that $3,500 is the exact total cost of the trip, no more, no less. No tax on top of that, no other kind of expenses, no extra spending money, etc., etc. That's all factored into the $3,500. I'm going to assume that. We're also going to assume that there are 4 weeks in each month. Now, of course, we know that in a calendar, it doesn't always work out to exactly 4 months in each month, but for the purposes of our calculation, we're going to assume that there are 4 weeks in each month. We're also going to assume that every week he works exactly the same amount of time. We're not going to assume that sometimes he works more, sometimes he works less. For the purpose of our calculation, we're assuming that he's working the exact same amount each week. We're also going to assume that he gets paid exactly the same through the entire 8 months that he's going to be saving money for. So that way our calculations will be based strictly on one particular rate. We're also going to assume that he has no other income, no other job, so in other words his income isn't going to increase at all to supplement that $3,500 trip cost, and also that he has no other expenses, so we don't need to assume that we're going to be taking away any kind of money or anything like that. So when we get to our calculations, then we're going to use these ideas, these kind of assumptions to help us with our calculations. So I've organized my work and labeled all the bits and pieces that I'm calculating. So the first thing I did was I calculated how much money was earned each day. So it was $15 per hour, and he works 8 hours a day is what I assume, so that gives $120 each day. I then calculated how much he's going to earn each week, so the $120 a day, multiply that by 1 day per week that he works, so he's going to make $120 per week. Then I'm going to calculate how much he's going to earn per month. Now remember that we assumed that there were 4 weeks in a month, so $120 per week times 4 weeks in a month brings him to $480 each month. So it's important to make that assumption that there was 4 weeks in a month. And finally, we're going to calculate then the $480 per month, multiply that by the 8 months that he has to work and save up his money. So he'll make in total after 8 months $38.40 altogether. So is he going to make enough? Yeah, absolutely. Yep, he's going to make enough money based on those assumptions that were made. So hopefully with these examples you've been able to understand what kind of assumptions that you need to make when we're making assumptions to make our calculations, and that pretty much ends our lesson here and also our chapter. So hope you've enjoyed our flipped unit for chapter 2.